Oh, there it goes. Nice.
Awesome, David. It's all you.
All right. Well, let's see. So, well, hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining today. Right. So, as you probably know from the event posting itself and everything, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on not only getting into what RAG is. Matter of fact, that's going to be one of the poll questions that we're going to ask. Matter of fact, wait a minute, Misbah. We should probably have people answer that poll now because we're going to explain what RAG is.
That's a good point. Let's do that. So I'm going to post our first question in.
All right, then. And I guess we should show everybody how to get to the poll and to do the QA.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let me share my screen. How about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Let's see if I can share this entire screen. Yeah, for folks who are joining, this is the RAG session. Really appreciate you all joining. We'll cover a few different topics. So let me see. So here, if you see this screen, David, do you see my screen with the... Okay, awesome. Yep. So in the activities section, once you click that, you'll see an option for polls and you'll see an option for Q&A. I'm seeing a few more options here since I have the host options available. But once you click that, you'll see polls and Q&A. So let's share the first question here.
And while Misbah brings that up, so just to continue on what I was saying. So yeah, we're gonna both explain what RAG is, where it applies and things like that, and then we're gonna go through a whole RAG pipeline using Langflow. So I'm gonna show you how to do that in Langflow, and then actually tie that into an application, right, where you can do some things from the application standpoint for those of you who are interested there. So, all right.
Awesome. So yeah, the question should be out right now. It's anonymous, so feel free to just say yes or no.
I guess I shouldn't answer this question, right? Am I gonna bias the results if I answer? Yeah, and so hopefully you see the poll. Again, go down to the little triangle, circle, and square in the lower right-hand corner, and give us your answer. Do you know what RAG is? Oh, should we show everyone the results?
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that and see what it does.
Let's get a feel.
Now, I see the polls in draft right now in launch. Is it running on your end?
Oh, okay. Maybe now.
There we go. There we go. Okay, let's see. Quick answers. If you know what RAG is, it's not anonymous. We're not going to judge you or anything like that. Oh, wow. We got a lot of folks already who know what RAG is. This is great, actually.
Oh, wow. Nice. Oh, cool.
Well, at least half the folks here know what RAG is. I guess we're done, Misbah, so we'll just go ahead and...
Oh, that's a good point. But I think it's nice because, we can cover the theory, maybe just, a few minutes and then quickly dive into the practical examples you've got, right?
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're split down the middle, but there's just no votes, right? So I don't know what the other 17 are feeling.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, again for joining. So perhaps just a quick mention. So my name is Misbah. I've been part of the Langflow team for, probably a week now. I've been working with Langflow from the beginning, from inception. So it's been fun working with the team on different tools. I've been teaching courses using Langflow. So it's been a fun tool to work with all along. And together with me is David.
Yeah, so I'm David Jones Gilardi. I'm a developer relations engineer. I've been a coder in DBA almost 30 years now. I'm currently focused on Python. Like Misbah, I'm in the world of, learning with everybody, right? And helping others learn how, these types of concepts, especially now in Gen AI. Ever since ChatGPT, what, July last year? So it just exploded. And this has just been our world now. We've seen this huge, advancement in Gen AI from that time into now, right? So it's been super exciting from that standpoint. So I appreciate you all coming on so we can all learn together.
Awesome. Yeah, and I see some questions in the Q&A tab, so that's really nice. Feel free to drop any questions you might have. Let's see, is there a way to implement a smart retriever that can read the user query and decipher which knowledge store or database to retrieve context from in Langflow? What do you think, David?
I think the answer is yes, actually. I'm not going to show something like that today. Funny enough, I was actually just talking to someone earlier who was doing something just like that. And you know, you can, the cool thing with Langflow, I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves on this one, but the cool thing with Langflow is, even though there is this no-code approach, and you're going to see all this today, even though there is this no-code approach, and if you really want to, you can totally use the visual components without code. But if you want to modify components, if you want to bring in any of your own kind of logic or something like that, there's nothing stopping you. It's all Python code under the hood. And a matter of fact, when I go through the flows, I'll pop into one of those. I wasn't planning on doing it, but it's not a big deal. I'll just show underneath, it's all Python, right? So if you're familiar with Python and you know how to modify those things, you can always modify components. I also think, I'm going to call him out, I also think I saw Gabriel join today. So if so if Gabriel's here and you have thoughts, please jump, pop something into the chat. That'd be wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the answer. Let's get started, actually.
Yep,
So quickly, just to mention, this session is about RAG. So I'm going to pull, just real quick, get this. All right. 5 minutes intro to RAG, and then we'll go on to implementation, and we have a few examples that David is going to share.
Yep.
For folks who are just, let's say, just starting off with ChatGPT, or probably they did not answer in the poll, when you ask question to ChatGPT, this is their previous UI, you might ask like, okay, write in style of Shakespeare, write a poem, write an essay or so. What happens is your prompt goes to some sort of AI system. You get a response back, and then you are probably given with some sort of response. Now, what's happening in the background is this particular AI system is called large language model. It's trained on a bunch of text from across the internet. There are many things to it. We're not going to cover details of what these large language models are, but one thing I want to point out is it's trained on general data available on the internet. Now, it might not be able to ask question like, okay, what's my company's travel policy, right? So this is very specific, or something about, your particular notes, anything that it was not available on the internet is not going to be able to answer that. So that's where retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, comes in handy. What we're doing is we're taking the available large language model, allowing it to augment with the data that we have internally, whatever we want it to see, and then based on that, it can generate a response. So maybe one step further down, we're not going to take too long on this one. So let's say your data is as a code base, or you have some notes or PDF. There was I would say a lot of applications that came around chat PDF, right? So you provide a PDF document, it can answer questions from that. So all of this data, what you can do is in this particular RAG system, you first pull that data in. And the way you can pull that data in, what LangChain showed us and what Langflow borrowed from there, is that you have these document loaders. These document loaders extract data, and then it makes it easy for us to then split the data and then save it. Now, this particular thing that we're doing here, which is the splitting of text, it was quite important previously, where we make small chunks, which can be easily understood by these large language models. But now what have happened is, in last year or so, we've seen the context window increasing quite large. So these large language models understand a lot more text in smaller chunks. We can increase the size, but still the splitting of text is quite important. Now, once we split the text, the reason why we're doing this, and the reason why we're going the next step, is we want the model to know if we ask question about the company's travel policy, it should be able to pull info about the travel policy, not about just general policy or just anything anywhere else, right? There might be a lot of data. So for that particular thing, now it's going to look into the travel policy section and that chunk, and it can give you an answer based on that. And this search, the way you can do it is either you have the text saved as is, but that might not give you answer as you're expecting, because that might lead to some sort of keyword-based search. So it might look for exact wording or so. The way that was found, which can do better than the keyword search, is where you convert this text to some sort of numbers. So it's called vectors, embeddings, and these numbers, what it does is it makes it easy for you to search through the number space, and whatever number that you're asking about comes closer to the previously saved text, then it gives you answer based on that. So that's what we're going to look at the next step. So basically, you're converting the text into some numbers or vectors and saving that into a database. And these databases, there are different types of vector stores, providers who offer that. So one could use any of them. And then once you're getting the answer out of that, you're basically searching in that space, which might be millions of vectors of those numbers that I was talking about, and then gets response from that. Now, this is, kind of quick, I would say, just, intro to the topic. What's happening as shown is there's the document ingestion portion, and I've talked about this before quite often. And then there is the search, the path, where if you have a query, then what happens is it needs to first convert that query into numbers so it can search within that space, right? So just kind of doing the apple to apple type of comparison, and then based on that, you're getting the response. Now, once you get the response, once you get a vector, that is closest match, so the company policy, it pulls that info, it is available now. What you do is you take probably the top 4, top 10, whatever number of responses you got from the vector store, give it to the large language model. If you're using OpenAI model, you say, hey, based on these 4, based on these 10 results, now summarize or give me a response what the user asked, and then you get the answer. So it's usually easier to break these two paths down, so have both of them individually built, and that's what David is going to do. So David is going to show.
Hey,
so
Misbah,
we have the
Sorry, real quick. Are you sharing your diagrams? Because we see ChatGPT.
Okay, sorry.
I wondered. I saw you moving in such a way. I was like, wait a minute, where's this stuff?
Oh wow. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I guess let me just had the entire screen up. We'll quickly just go through the last step. Where. Yeah, I mean, basically, I just wanted to show. Okay, so you see the screens right now. Okay, do you see anything right now, David?
Yes,
quick
looks
check.
Good. Yeah,
okay,
step
nice.
5 retrieve.
Yeah, so just wanted to kind of show, how you can load documents, right, and go from there to splitting documents, and then from there you can take the text, convert to embedding. From embeddings, store it into a vector store, and once we have that, we can get a response. And then, the next thing was we can have both of those paths separated out, right? So that's where I was showing the document ingestion and the query portion. So document ingestion, again, as shown, everything happens up to the vector database, and the next step is from the query, you're converting into some sort of embedding and getting the response. So yeah, that was just quick kind of recap of the theory. A lot of folks already know about this, so we'll jump into the actual implementation that David is going to show.
Yeah, and Victoria has a question. Would it be possible to access the presentation afterward?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Alrighty. All right, so here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get a quick verification. I'm going to move all of you over here, though, because that way I can actually see. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing the Langflow UI. I see it through there. If I could get just confirmation, make sure we're good from that standpoint.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donald. I see that thumbs up come through. All right, excellent. So, right, like what Misbah was saying, the RAG, the retrieval augmented generation piece, right? So what we can do, and to kind of step back, to talk a bit about Langflow. So Langflow is a way to visually generate Gen AI workflows. Now, Gen AI workflows can be all sorts of things, by the way. They could be a basic chatbot, the basic prompting here one, if you were to click on this template, it'd bring you to one that talks like a pirate, right? It'd be very similar to if you went like in ChatGPT and you said, talk to me like a pirate or something very, very simple, right? And then you can start building up complexity. Now, these are just templates to get you going. But what Langflow allows you to do is visually chain these up together. Now, we talked in the beginning about this being, both like a no code and, it's both code and no code, right? And what I mean by that is if you wanted to, you could spend your time in the UI visually constructing these flows. And by the way, I'm going to go through all this, right? As we just kind of set with this primer, you could do that. Now, the answer to the questions we had earlier, underneath the hood, this is all Python, right? Every one of these is actually just a Python module. So you can actually get in here, you can modify these, you can make your own, all sorts of things. So if, there's actually a bunch of components, there's all sorts of inputs and outputs, especially if you're doing like a chatbot. All sorts of models are supported. It's model agnostic. All sorts of vector stores are supported, especially if we're talking like a RAG model, like we are here today. You need somewhere to store the data, right? There's all these, different components that you can use. So it's very flexible. There's the ones that exist, and then there's the ones that, if you so choose, you could make custom. Now, for the purpose of today, like I said, we're going to focus on the RAG pipeline. Now, this is actually a vector store template, or a vector store RAG template. So what that means is it both has a RAG pipeline, a vector store, and then it's got a data generation piece. Now, the template here, what I've actually done for everyone here today, I've actually modified this slightly, and here's why. So this top flow is the one that I call the conversational flow, right? This is the one that is responsible for once you have some data in your RAG store, you've, like Misbah was saying, you've converted some documents or you've converted some URLs or some data that is not available to the LLMs. You've converted that into embeddings and you've stored it in a vector store. But now you want to have a conversation with that data and you want to use the power of the LLMs, to do something useful. So that's one path. That's this flow up top. Now, the one on the bottom in the template is actually, this is the generative part. This is the part that we are going to take some input. Now, the base template uses a file. You're not limited to a file. You can use URLs. You could use a directory, API requests, whatever, or a combination of those. And you can pull that data in, have it iterate through and chunk through the data, what Misbah was talking about earlier, where, because of the way the models work and everything, we grab chunks of text, right? And then there's usually some overlap. There's usually some semantic quality to them. And then we're creating those embeddings off of this. And that's exactly what's going on in this flow, right? Now, the reason why I decided for our purposes today to separate these out into two flows is because I was looking at this from a developer standpoint. I code, I build apps. I'm like, all right, if I was building a real RAG app, how might I want to do this? And the way I look at this is I would probably have a separate ingestion path, which is responsible for pulling in either I've got some initial set of data that I want to convert and put in my RAG store so I can have an intelligent conversation with my LLM, or I also have that, but then I have some other data that's coming in dynamically, right? And I want to be able to handle those cases outside of the pure conversational flow. So what I'm going to do is go to what I've set up today. And I'm actually going to clear this one out. That's that template one I just created. And you can see I have two flows here, right? So I'm going to start here with the conversational one. Now, what I want to do is break this down a little bit. Let's look at what's actually happening, right? So if we start here, and I'll zoom way into there, we're going to make essentially a RAG bot, a chat RAG bot, right? So it is a chat bot with the RAG capability. So I need some kind of input, right? Now, this is one of the basic components that's in Langflow, this chat input. So it allows me to have a conversation. I can start to type something as input as the user. Now, right away, in order for this to make any sense, in order for this question, when I go through the flow in a second, in order for this to make any sense as far as the data that I have stored in my RAG store, I need to also convert this in real time to a vector embedding, right? That is matching semantically like the other ones that are stored in my RAG store and using the same model and everything. So in Langflow, what I can do here is I've got this input. I've got my RAG store. This is actually where I'm going to be doing the search against. But notice this OpenAI embeddings, right? So I can attach this embedding here. And then what will happen is as I am inputting any text, that will automatically be converted into an embedding. It'll be applied to my RAG store as part of the vector similarity search, right? And I'll show you some actual cases of this here in a moment. One other thing I want to point out is, for our vector store today, we are using AstraDB. That's right here. Right now, just to see starting off, I have a database that I created, but there's no data, right? I did that on purpose because that's kind of showcase something else about Langflow. Now, Langflow is not limited to AstraDB, right? AstraDB, and full disclosure, I work for DataStax, right? It is part of our GenAI stack. But there are other vector stores here. So, Langflow is open source. It's agnostic to its models and to the vector stores. So you can pretty much use it as you see fit. Okay, great. So now we've asked it a question. We've converted that into an embedding, and we've done some type of search against our RAG store. And now we need to get the response out. So what did we get back? What did our search results return? And then here's where it gets really interesting. Notice how this is tied up. This output from our extracted data is tied up to the context. So if I take a look at our prompt component, you'll see that I have this little curly brace context. The curly braces mean this is a variable reference that I can then tie into my component. So notice here, you see these inputs. Those match these curly braces, right? So now this allows me, when I do that similarity search and I return the data from my vector store, that allows me to set the context of the prompt along with the question we asked originally, right? So it starts tying this stuff together. And then finally, we can have the conversation with our LLM. Now, the final thing I'll say about this particular part of the flow is that you might be curious why I'm using two LLMs here. I have both OpenAI and I have Grok. And this is just something I wanted to illustrate, that when you are using a RAG pipeline, it's actually super important that whatever embedding models that you're using to convert your data into vector embeddings, that you stay within that family when you are having a conversation with your LLM. Because what happens is, the way that Grok, in this case, like the Gemma model that Grok is using here, compared to the GPT-4o model, they don't store the data semantically in their embeddings the exact same way, right? So there is a very good chance that if you are not in the same model family as the one that you created the embeddings for, that when you go to ask questions, you're going to get useless answers, right? And so I'm not trying to pick on Grok or anything like that. I only put it in here to illustrate this. Okay, so why don't we get to something real quick I want to start with. I've got no data, right? So my my LLM essentially has no context. So once you have a flow up and everything, you can come to this playground and then you can start having a conversation. Now, what I've done today is I am going to ingest a bunch of my old blog content. This stuff is actually from many years ago now. And I just thought it was fun. But, the LLMs definitely don't have this. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting is this. I'm going to say, when did I get married? Now, again, I haven't actually put anything in my RAG store yet. We haven't gotten there. So neither one of these LLMs have any context at all. And so if you imagine for a moment, what happens there is just go to ChatGPT and said, when did I get married, right? It doesn't have any context whatsoever. Okay. And by the way, the first time when I do this, when I run through this, a really kind of cool feature of Langflow is where I have this vector store component. I'm going to come back to this in a second. This one here, we haven't really talked about the configuration yet. I've kind of set it up so it'll talk to this database. But what it will do is part of the way these components work is if it goes to access a collection that doesn't exist, it'll automatically create it, which is what it did here. We still have no data. I haven't put any data in it yet, but that initial lag that you saw it was just kind of priming the system and creating the collection. All right, so let's go back to our playground. So notice what happened here. Again, we don't have any RAG data. Neither one of the LLMs have any context. So both of them are like, I don't know, right? Is pretty much what it came down to. So here's what I want to do next. So I mentioned that I split these out into two different flows. So if you remember, we have the one that is a conversational one, but then the one that is to generate RAG data. Do I have to do it this way? No. But again, I wanted to because from an application development perspective, I probably want a separate ingestion flow that I can use to build up my RAG store separate from my conversational flow, if you will. So what I've done here is notice this URL. you'll see this, this old blog post. Okay, yeah, so maybe it's been a moment. That's this one, right? That's the same one. So I set up initially this particular generative flow to then, it's going to grab the data from this blog post. It's going to chunk over the data, iterate over it, right? With the parameters you see here, convert that data into embeddings, and then it's going to store the data in my vector store, right? So that did finish. So if I come over here real quick and I take a look at the data, I should have some data. Wonderful, right? So now you can see some data, and you should be able to recognize some of the stuff that we have, right? It's actually pulling out, some of the little breadcrumb things, the dates and things like that, right?
Hey,
so
David,
yeah,
it seems like we're seeing your playground screen. Is that the one you're showcasing?
oh, that's
Just quick
interesting.
check. Yeah.
Oh, I'm okay. Let me, what I'm going to do. I'm going to share again, because it should be sharing my whole screen, but let's find out. Thank you for telling me that. Yeah, it should be doing the entire screen. Let's see what happens now. Okay, let me know it's sharing. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, here we go. And are you seeing this? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So this is what I was talking about here. Thank you for the thumbs up and confirming, everybody. I really appreciate that. I can see those. Yeah. So now you can see what I'm talking about, right? Where you can see in my vector store, you have both the, the actual chunk that was pulled out and the embedding that goes with it. And by the way, if you're curious, these embeddings are just these huge arrays, right? These absolutely huge arrays of data that actually encapsulate semantic information from the text, the chunks that we pulled out, right? So you make that connection. Okay, great. So now we have some data, right? Now we have some data in there. So let's go ahead and go back to our conversation piece, go back to our playground. Let's ask that same question again. When did I get married? Okay, and we'll see both Grok and, so interesting. So this gets to my point about the different models used compared to when you're doing your embeddings and then you're having your conversation. Notice the OpenAI one, which is the model I use, the ADA02 model to embed my RAG data. And you can see that it actually, it's correct. It's not explicitly mentioned, but it pulls out that it looks like maybe it was around this time and things like that, where Grok in this case, again, not picking on Grok, it's just it's a model mismatch, really. It just doesn't have that semantic context, so it doesn't know, right? Okay, so now why don't we take this, though, to kind of another level. So great. We had that one URL that was in the flow. But what happens if I want to do this from, more of an application standpoint, more of a dynamic standpoint, right? So I'm going to go back over to this one. Now, something really cool that Langflow does is for any of the flows that you have, there is also an API, right? Whether you want to run just a pure curl statement, if you want to use Python API, if you want to embed a chat widget, whatever, right? Now, in this case, I'm actually going to just show both curl and the Python API. But what I really want to do is I want to tweak my API. I want to tweak what I'm doing because I actually want to add in some of my other blog posts here, right? So what I'll do when I'm in the API is I'm going to go to tweaks. And in this case, I'm going to update the URL parameter. And if you're curious, by the way, I used to be an aerial artist. That's where that GIF came from. I was dropping into my laptop in a very geeky way, right? You got to drop into your laptop, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these out. I'm going to pull these two out, right? And then when I go back, notice what happened, right? Notice what happened here in both my API and the curl and any of these really is it added these tweaks of these particular URL variables. So I'm going to copy this code out. Okay, I see that you did switch with me. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab this. Now, I've got this empty Py file for Python. I'm just going to pop this right in, right? I should be able to copy that directly without doing anything else. Now, imagine for a moment from this standpoint, you have some running application and you have some like organic data that's coming in from URLs or something like that, and you want to populate, or it could be files, whatever. In this particular case, since I've set this up to be URLs, I can just tweak these URLs and make this call anytime I want, right? And then now I can be ingesting whatever the URLs are. So I'm going to say Python, there it is. I'm going to execute this. So it's now going to execute that flow, right? So this flow here is deployed effectively. It's my local host here, but you could deploy it really anywhere. So even though you have this no-code way of building out this RAG pipeline and everything like that, you can absolutely embed the inputs and outputs and the execution of those flows in your code. And we can see here that it, it finished the output. So now, and I'm paranoid and I'm double checking that you all can see this.
Yeah, we can see it, David.
When I come back to my database and I update, right, I should see a lot more values, and I do, right? And you can see there's a lot more in here. So now I have a lot more context being set in my RAG store. And again, for every one of these, you can see the chunks that it pulls out, and then you can see the embedding that goes along with it. Okay, great. So now I can start asking other questions, right? I'm going to pop over here, go down to the playground, and I could say, are my nodes healthy? Spell healthy correctly. There we go. Are my nodes healthy? Again, imagine if I were just doing this in ChatGPT, it would not have any context. As a matter of fact, funny enough, when I did this, when I was doing this with like no data at all, OpenAI, the ChatGPT 4.0 model would be like, I don't know about your nodes, but let's talk about node health, and it would just go on. It's like, it's contextually okay, but it has no idea, right? So again, Grok doesn't really know. It kind of pulls out that maybe it's been mentioned, so it is able to gather some meaning. But notice how OpenAI is like, yes, your nodes are healthy, right? It's literally pulling that right out of here. And then the final one in this case is I will say, what is killer video? Now, honestly, killer video is something that the LLMs could potentially know about. That is, that was actually an application that existed for years and such like that. It definitely was out there in the internet and such. But in this context, again, it really doesn't. And again, you can see where Grok here just doesn't have the information. This is, again, that model mismatch, right? So the model that I stored the embeddings with in this case is significantly different from the one with Grok than the one that I'm having the LLM conversation, right? Where the OpenAI one, that one is in fact it's in the same model family. And you can see that the response that it gives is, if you were to compare these and take a look, you'd see it's pretty much, dead on.
David, maybe one real quick question over there.
Yeah.
I think you brought a real good point. So you had both model, you're comparing both, right? So many folks, they want to test out GPT 4.0, whatever is the latest versus the older version. So can one just drop those blocks and just compare response across just different models? Because I really like, one chat has everything, all of the responses.
Yeah, exactly. So you can totally do that. As a matter of fact, notice how both of these models have their own chat output, right? So, I mean, could you tie them into one? I believe you can, actually, if I do that. I want to say you can. It's going to make me a liar. Am I lying? I'm totally lying right now, aren't I? Maybe it is limited to one at a time. Okay, yeah. So it is actually one at a time, apparently. But yeah, you can hook them up each to their own chat output. And in this case, what I've actually done is I've turned their streaming on. So that way, instead of having to wait for the whole response to come back, they'll both just stream as they come in. So, if I wanted to test out other models, I could just hook them up, right? I could just go to other models. I could say, oh, let's pull in Cohere. Obviously, I need an account and a key and things like that. And then I can do things like this. And I can just say, okay, well, here's the input. Where's my key? And then, do the same kind of thing. And then if I go to the playground, it'll actually have multiple chat, right? I'll see all those come out. Was that answering the question you were asking there, Misbah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, many times people want to see response from different models, right? I think this would be really helpful. And having the response shown on the chat window itself, that's really nice. And also, I think, David, you covered one of the questions that was asked about API usage. So in general, the first step that you showed is one could test it on the local host if needed, but also this could be done on any of the platforms we showed last week, right? On Render, Railway, and all. And then you can access this from pretty much anywhere, right? As long as you can point the front end to that API, that's basically it.
Right. I mean, you see right here, it's like super simple. I mean, here's the URL, right? So wherever this is deployed and such like that, then that gets reflected in the API when you open that up. right? So to your point, if it wasn't just localhost and it was up on some provider, an edge network or something, or your own internal network, then you would just point your code to wherever your particular endpoint is, and that would run just fine.
Awesome. And I think a part of that question was to show how to host Langflow on different platforms. So we covered that last week. Yeah, if you were to just look our YouTube channel for Langflow, then we covered that as first portion. And I think there was also a question, David, about Python dev intro. So the different tabs you see for Python in Langflow, what does that mean, and how can one use that? Maybe just 30 seconds, quick overview.
Yeah, so I mean, the Python API is honestly the one that I prefer. It gives the most control. So if I'm a Python developer, and as you saw a second ago, all I really did here is I literally just copied that code. But if I wanted to say embed this in my own Python app, maybe I have another app that I'm working on right now that I've essentially just taken this API and encapsulated it into a class that I use that I can then instantiate, and then I have access to things like run flow and things, but it allows me to have like ultimate control, if you will, over what's going on. So I can control the inputs, I can control what the outputs look like. One of the things that this does in its output, it gives the message that comes back is this big JSON blob, right, in the chat output. And there's a lot of information in there, but depending on what I'm doing, like the language app I'm working on right now, I just want one of those things, right? So I can then say, write the Python that'll essentially parse that JSON out and just give me the little piece I want, make it nice and clean. And now I've got this nice app, right, where I can just make a call to it. But I'm still just purposely, for ease, I'm just literally plopping in the exact API, right, from that standpoint. But it does give me lots of control. The Python code one is, you could, if you want, you notice how in any of the, oh, that's right, my API. That's that's funny. Yeah, in any of the flows that you have, you can, there we go. Yeah, you can actually, you can download and upload your flows as JSON files. And then you can use those, you reference them here. That's where you can see, like, this would be that JSON file. Yeah, duh, this was literally right in front of me, and I, for some reason, blanked on it. So I can download this if I wanted to, right? And I can just use the JSON structure to also run the flow. Again, for me personally, I tend to lean more on the Python API. And then there's the chat widget, which is just something you can just embed, like in a simple widget you can embed in HTML, on the front end. And then finally curl, that allows you, if you wanted to run something like, if you have a cron job, you're running it from the terminal, you're not running from a Python app, you can totally affect change through the cron job. Now, was there more to that question at all, Misbah? I'm not actually seeing that one. So I'm wondering if there's any other context there.
Yeah, no, I think it was just an intro from what I understood. In case if there's, if you'd like to learn more about it, feel free to pop in the chat, or you can, reach us out on Discord as well. But yeah, David, back to you. I think we covered, there are a few more questions we can answer right after your presentation.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So a couple other things I want to show while we're in here. So one of the other modifications I made to the basic template, pretty much 99% of what is here is actually in the basic template. But I made some extra modifications for our purposes today, because I found that as I have been developing RAG pipelines, that some of these are really useful. Now, if you remember a while ago, I mentioned this extracted chunks. When I am, say, asking a question, again, like what is killer video? Again, it's performing that vector search against the data that is in my database. And what it's going to do, it's actually going to return the top results, right? It's essentially the ones that are most similar, right? That's how it's getting results back. And that's what's going to populate our context. But as you're going through your app and your pipeline, you might be really interested in, well, what were those results, right? Like, what was the context? Because you might be troubleshooting something. You might be curious to see how a particular similarity search is responding. I've actually been, I noticed for, if you're using normalized vectors, you can use a dot product instead of cosine. You should get the same results, right, in those cases. But then how do you test that? This is a good way to test that, right? So what I did is, on top of extracted chunks, I added this little records output. And by the way, something super cool in Langflow is if you're ever curious and you're like, well, how am I supposed to know what what components I can get out of another one? If you just click on the little node, it'll actually show you. Right now, I happen to know about the records output. So here, I'm going to show you. When we asked the question earlier, when did I get married? In fact, do I have any in there? Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now, remember earlier, we see these responses, but over here you see these outputs. That extracted chunks and records output, those are in fact those components that you saw wired up a second ago. Now, extracted chunks is literally just the raw chunks that are coming back. And this is actually what's being fed into the context. Now, these are useful. Right now, I've got my screen zoomed way in so everybody can see well and stuff. I usually have it pulled back, but it's even so you can pull the data out. I mean, you can see what it is, but it's a lot harder to discern what's actually going on here. So I added that records output because what it allows me to do, little feature here that you can just pull this out. It allows me to see exactly what the chunks were in a more like tabular format. So now if I take a look at these, if you remember when we were looking at the data in the database earlier, when I had the first set of data, it pretty much looked something like these, right? I could pull them directly out and I could see exactly what chunks were being returned based off of the question that I asked, right? So it made it really easy and nice for me to just kind of go in there and see exactly what it was being fed into the context here in my prompt, right?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, David. Because starting off, you might get the simple answers easily, but then when you get to some detailed answers that you want from your RAG app, you might not be able to get that, and then you just need some way of seeing what's happening right at each layer. So that becomes really important. And was that, David, something that is by default available for folks to see? What's the record and what type of other data that's flowing, or is there something that we need to activate?
Yeah, so as part of basic Langflow, like if I were to, let's say I didn't make any modifications, it would look like this, right? The basic RAG template looks like this. So what I did is I said, well, I know that I want records. I was familiar with records output, so I'm just going to pull that down. And then I will take the output. I want to see the chunks that were output. So I'm going to take that output, just wire it up, and then that will expose it here, right? And if I take that out, you'll notice that that's not there anymore, right? So this is specifically going to power what we're seeing there in the playground. So it's not, like I said, it's not part of the basic template, but it is one of the basic components that you can just wire up very quickly.
Perfect. Thanks. And maybe, David, real quick while you're at that, what are the types of files supported right now? And let's say if one were to add different types, is that an option?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, funny enough, earlier today when I was building everything out, I actually had a file wired up. There's nothing stopping you from wiring up multiple different types of data, right? And then what's super cool about this is that, like, from the file standpoint, if you think about it, when you're reading a file from disk, right, there's some logic there, right? You've actually got to go find it. You've got to pull it in, all sorts of things. It's a little bit different from how like a URL works, or maybe an API request. As a matter of fact, you can see, we take a look at an API request. There's a lot more there because you have to actually wire up that particular API, right? But there is nothing stopping you from wiring all of these up and having all of these inputs. And as part of the basic flow, you might have a file or something set up or whatever. But then, as you saw before via the API, if I come in here and then I say, well, I want to tweak that, okay? Or I want to add, a different set of API values, I can absolutely do that, right? And then by tweaking, and by the way, you don't have to go through this UI to do this. I just found it is super convenient. If I tell the UI like this, like, oh, I'm going to tweak it, I come back, boom, it gives me the code. I can just copy this. And now when I go to my code, it's like super simple to just add those on, right? So if I had multiple components and I had a file component and if I had a URL component, I could absolutely put multiple in here and feed in different types as I saw fit, right? So I can definitely have like a multimodal or multi-use, kind of ingestion, if you will.
Awesome. And is there a way to prepare data? Is there some recommendation for preparing data for any of these input blocks?
You mean like, is there a way that you want to like chunk it up first or do anything like that? Or
Yeah, something that helps with RAG pipeline.
Honestly, I think part of that is really going to depend on your model, because there are models now, like the Colbert model is a really great example. Colbert is significantly more accurate than a lot of the existing models and such, but it is super dense, right? So by nature, the way that it collects the data and does the embeddings and things like that, it actually collects a lot more information. You're going to use a lot more data, but it's again a trade-off. So from that standpoint, you should expect to have potentially longer ingest times, right? And things like that compared to what you might with some of the other models. So I would say it really depends on what you're after. Like you have to ask yourself the question, what am I trying to do with the RAG store? Where we've seen folks that have actually used something super dense like Colbert is where accuracy is absolutely like key for them. I definitely know one person like in the medical field, like that is absolutely key. So they use that to make sure that their data is actually as accurate as possible. But if you have just kind of like a generic chatbot or something, you may not need to go to that level, and you can go with something, kind of a bit, kind of standard today, if you will.
Perfect. Well, actually, if you don't mind, David, I just wanted to check, what's the level folks rate themselves in terms of the use of Langflow. So I'll just pop this question in. If you see yourself as beginner, intermediate, advanced, just want to get a feel of your familiarity with the FlowWise environment in general. So let's see. Do you
Can we
see
show
the
everyone
poll?
the results again? Oh, it's going. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Nice.
Oh, we have at least an advanced person. Is that not Gabriel? Is Gabriel? Intermediate. Cool. Okay, so we have some folks that are
Nice.
familiar. That's neat.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, because definitely using APIs and kind of having some flows if you want to upload or just modify, that's really nice. So maybe what we can do is slowly build on the content as we go the next few weeks and kind of take everyone on this journey, beginner to intermediate, to cover some of the advanced components as well. Nice. Yeah, back to you, David. We've got a few more questions that we can answer later.
Yeah, no problem. And I just want to, one last thing I want to talk about the vector store piece real quick. So when I mentioned earlier, I just kind of glossed over it, right? That when you are interacting with any of these vector stores, obviously they're going to be these are usually cloud-based systems. There are some, exceptions like Chroma, right, and stuff that are going to be local and such and all, but most of them are going to be online. So it's pretty stock that you're going to have like a token, some kind of security token and endpoint things. And each one of the stores are configured for that, right? So if I grabbed one, say from Chroma or something like that, you'll see that it is going to be specific to that particular store, right? And you can also use a combination of them, right? So again, if you want to do some comparisons and stuff, Langflow makes it super easy. I can just say, okay, go ahead and set up my Chroma database. Now I can start wiring stuff up just like I was before, and I can do a side-to-side comparison if I really want to. It's really great. I know in the development world, we spend a lot of time comparing products and saying like, okay, I want to compare these 3 vector stores that are on the top of my list. This is a really neat way you can just wire them up in the same exact logic and same flow, and then kind of see what you get out of them. But yeah, so like I said, the token endpoint. By the way, these are if you're in Astra, when you create a vector database, you get the endpoint here and the token. It's literally just copying and pasting them in here. Now, it's not so much that I wanted to point out, but notice these values, right? It's just Langflow RAG token, right? These look like global variables, and they are. So Langflow has this neat feature that is, in fact, global variables. I could store, say, my token in the raw for everyone to see, but that probably wouldn't be very secure. But the part of this that really, I think, brings it home for me is that these globals are global to all of your flows. So when I come in here and let's pretend I'm going to create some kind of global variable, and I'm going to say some key. And then I'm going to say, hey, you're a credential, because, I don't want to put anything like my key in there. I'm going to add some value and save it. When I do that, that is then available to all of my flows and all of my components. So notice I have this AstroDB search here, right, as part of this flow. And then if I come over to the generate one, I'm using the same exact stuff. It's the same globals, right? So I can just reference those globals now. And so it makes it nice, so I can just set it once and it's available everywhere. And it's the same thing too here. There's this collection name. I actually just set a collection name underneath in the global of rag data, rag underscore data, and now I can just store that as a global and I can apply it to all of my components. So it's like a super nice feature from that standpoint. And I guess the final thing I'll say here is that everything that you are seeing between these two models and everything like that. Imagine for a moment, Langflow is built on LangChain. Underneath the hood, a lot of LangChain going on here. Imagine coding up all of these individual components. Can you do it? Yes. Right? Could you, by the way, can you go into these, pull the code out and implement it on your own locally? You could absolutely do that. But why, honestly? Because you can just very quickly and visually put these together here, these nice complex flows, test them out, and then you can use the API in your own code and keep your code focused on what its main purpose is and, kind of leverage Langflow for the rest. Last thing I'm going to say here is a really cool recent feature in Langflow is the subflow component. What this allows you to do is execute and actually use as input and output other flows. So, I ran it directly when we were in the generate rag store one, but I can come up here and I can just run this. That is now running the flow that is populating my rag store, right? So I can, oh yeah, I broke something. Funny enough, I broke something earlier when I was doing my other app, and I'll have to look into that. But that's what the subflow actually does there is it will allow me to then execute against whatever other flows, and then I can actually hook them up in my logic chain. So if I've got a particular flow that maybe has some complex logic, I can put it into a subflow. I can wire them up together without having to explode the whole thing. Alrighty. Yeah, that's it for that part. What do we have as far as like?
No, that was awesome,
questions
David.
and stuff.
Also, I wanted to point out, even if there's some sort of error, the good thing is you see the message, right? So then you can go to that and figure out what's happening.
Yes.
So that makes it easy to find out what's happening. Even if you're on the coding side of things, what I've seen is a pure, let's say any library, I don't want to name, but if you're building something, you get into error, many a times you have trouble finding out what's happening. So you have to kind of do print and this and this. So this makes it real easy. Awesome. So yeah, David, actually there are a few more questions, but before that, I just wanted to have one last poll. Just wanted to ask everyone. If you got a chance to start the repo. If you do,
we're totally putting everyone on the spot right now.
Let me turn. Well, let's see if I can anonymize.
Oh, I love the about to do now. That's great.
Awesome. We'll really appreciate if you could start the repo. That well, just one thing, it gives us the indication that you really like him, and that also gives us motivation to kind of build more and more. And if you have any requests for us, feel free to drop them in the Discord over here. Reach out to any of us. So maybe a few more questions, David.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see. Do you have one on top of mine? I'm reading through the list right now. Actually, do we have anything in Q&A? Is that where we're pulling them from?
Let's see about rag. So there is something about doing entirely locally, everything. So embedding model, LLM, vector store, right? So doing locally is quite popular. What would you say about that, David?
I mean, yeah, you can do it. The technology, the hardware is getting better. Like if you're talking on your laptop compared to actually, specific hardware that's meant for processing, what we've seen with like the explosion at NVIDIA and their AI chips and that kind of deal. Don't expect, unless you have the right hardware, I would not expect some of the models to run as fast as they might from their public, like where they are served publicly. But you can do that, right? So if you take a look in, you'll see that there is support for Ollama, right? So you can wire up to a local model if you want. That's totally doable. let's see. Yeah, the vector store, I think that's going to depend on the vector store if it's local or not, right? Not all vector stores, like Aster, for example, is a SaaS product. It's up on the cloud, right? There is not a local version of it. But if you're thinking like Chroma, that would be a thing. I think PG Vector would be local as well. Because I think, but I like Supabase is totally online. Pinecone is online. Mongo's on. Like most of these are going to be cloud-based services, but there are some that are local if you're super interested in that.
That's right. And some of them, they offer both, right? So you can just have the local version installed. Usually the way I suggest people is if you want to go with an easy solution, just try using some of the available ones which are online. You just get the API key, just drop the API key and get started. If you want to get to advanced levels, and then you can test it with that base template and kind of go from there to the local versions. Of course, if you have everything, that the data is private to an extent where you don't want even any of the LLMs or embedding models to get to that, then it's totally fine. But even for that case, you can wire up and test with some generic data, see if things are working fine, and then convert it to something local. That makes it a bit easier. Starting completely locally, if you haven't, let's say, have Olam on your computer, or know how to run the vector database on your computer, then it might make it a bit tricky as a starting point. But yeah, it is possible to do completely, entirely locally with Langflow.
Okay. All right. What else you got there? I know we're coming up here to time. Is there? I think we maybe have time for one other.
Sure.
Thank you, Christos. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm seeing something about large RAG data sets, right? So something real quick. So there could be some change in strategy how you do that for larger data set. But to begin with, I would say give it a try with just the basic setup. These vector databases, the way they're configured, they're scalable. And when you ask question, they look through the entire space to get answers. So you're going to find that it does handle quite well. Now, there are some optimization strategies that even David pointed out about before. So where you can look at maybe prompt optimization, or you can look about how the query is sent to a particular database, or there are different ways. But I would say for a majority of cases, if you just start with the basic template, it is pretty good. It is quite robust, to be honest.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the basic template. I mean, I barely modified the template for today, right? The only thing I did was take this and put it into its own flow, and then add a piece, and then obviously for illustration purposes, I put Grok on here. But otherwise, it's all there, right? So as much as I'm biased towards Astra, that's part of our stack. It's a wonderful vector store and all that. But there are plenty of other vector stores that are here, and it's as simple as grabbing the vector store of your choice, and obviously just setting it up for your information, and then just wiring it up. Right. So it's from that standpoint, it's pretty darn simple to do. So I would say that this is a really good starting place if you're looking to build a RAG pipeline.
Great. Well, we are, I think, a minute over time. Any of the questions, feel free to, if we couldn't answer it, feel free to drop it in Discord. We'll do our best to answer. Yeah, there are many strategies. Certainly, if you have any questions about RAG strategies, reach out to us. Yeah, we'll also try to build on this content, so maybe we can go into some advanced topics in the future. Yeah, thanks everyone. Anything else, David?
No, I thank you everybody. I appreciate your attentiveness and all the wonderful questions and such. And I hope to see everybody on the next one. I hope you got something out of this today. And with that, we'll see y'all later.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Oh, I love that. I just noticed the big the confetti.
That looks nice. All right, we'll end the call. Thank you all again for joining.
Take care.